So now you can, that was the reason I just.
Welcome, everybody. Hey, Bob. So we're gonna start with Hannah Leverns, who is joining us. And Hannah has developed an interactive module designed to help students understand the basics of New York City budget in conjunction with the Independent Budget Office. So I am, without further ado, I'm gonna introduce Hannah to give us her presentation.
Hey, nice to
Hello,
meet you.
Hannah.
Is it better if I sit here or if I stand?
However you
over?
like.
Okay. Do you mind putting up the presentation?
As long as you speak into the owl.
Okay, perfect. I have
Yeah.
my- Okay,
Just make sure the clicker is.
I guess we can do that.
sounds great. So, hi everyone, my name is Hannah. I'm coming here from the Independent Budget Office. We are a nonpartisan city agency and we're located only a couple blocks away. But I'm here specifically to talk to you about a high school city budget module that we've developed and we want to share with you guys because we know you are an education committee. So if you have any teachers or any schools in mind that would be interested in this module, I'm gonna talk a little bit about it and then I'm also gonna give you my contact information so that you can reach out to me if you're interested in it. So just to give you a little background about the module, this is designed for high schoolers in grades 9 to 12. We've already been to a couple of schools throughout New York City, and it is a 2-day workshop where myself and a couple analysts from our team actually go into schools and we talk to them about the city budget. So we'll talk to them about things like revenues and expenditures. We will also go over the basics of, who's in charge of the budget. We'll go over the fact that the mayor's office is the primary actor in shaping the New York City budget. And then we'll also talk to them about city council and ways that they can get involved as well. So we've gotten really good reviews from students so far about it. They've been really interested in it and learned a lot of new things. And on day 2, they're actually going to be stepping into a hands-on budget activity where they're going to role play either as the mayor or as city council, and they'll kind of debate and discuss reallocating funds in a mock New York City budget. So just to highlight, I'm going to showcase some of the student work that they've been presenting on. So these two groups wanted to allocate more money to use to the education budget as well as to the library's budget. I was really impressed by the education group in particular because they talked about, the fact that the class size mandate is upcoming and New York City is going to have to potentially think about more funding for that mandate. And so they included details about that. The group that wanted to highlight more money to libraries talked about, how kind of small the library budget currently is, and also really highlighted the programs that the library offers, like tech training, English language classes, and art workshops, in addition to the fact that the library is a public resource. Just 2 more quickly, there are also students that wanted to invest more at the city level in social services. So we talked to them about that funding for SNAP, for Medicaid, and for EBT as some examples of social programs. And then there was that wanted to advocate funding for parks because of the fact that, parks really have an improvement on mental health as well as physical health. And they also talked about equitability in the distribution of parks and green spaces around New York City. So again, I was personally really impressed by the detail and engagement that the students in these classes showed. And we'd love to bring it to your district if you know anyone that is interested. I'm gonna put my email, on the last slide here. I think this is also being sent around to you and it's printed out. So yeah, if you know any teachers in your area or anyone that would be interested, this is a really great opportunity for students who maybe don't know that much about the city budget. Before I worked here, I didn't know anything about the city budget, so I think it's something everyone can learn something about. But yeah, please reach out to me with any questions about this or anyone that you have in mind that might be interested in this resource. And that's it, really quick.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely think we should connect you with Millennium and Stuyvesant High Schools. which are in our district. There are many others too.
Absolutely.
But those two come to mind immediately because we've had the most interaction with the two of them. So we should connect you on an email this week.
That'd be perfect.
And then you can go over and meet with them. I think they'd both be really receptive. And then, you know, we could take a look at, one of the things we wanted to do is do a deeper dive into the high schools that are in our neighborhood that either moved to our neighborhood, relocated here, that we're not as familiar with, but they're here. That, you know, we are gonna try to loop in general to the community board activities. So this would be a nice way to start that off. So,
Absolutely.
like Murray Bertram's down here, and what's the one that's on Lower Broadway? They handle some of the summer school programs. Can't pick it up in my mind right now, but there's that one as well. And there's our advertising school. And then there's Richard Green, which is down in Fidei. So yeah, we can reach out to all of them.
Also,
For you.
that'd be great.
It'll be fantastic. Does anybody have any questions for Hannah, Andrew?
I think Bob does online.
Bob?
Also.
Bob,
Not-
Sandy? Yeah.
I was just messing around with the controls on the computer. But it's a great thing. It's really great.
Yeah.
Thank you for presenting this.
Yeah, of course. And if you have any questions on, you know, the agency in general or what we do, you can also feel free to reach out to me by email. We also do requests, so people, members of the community can email us with any budget related questions they have. And we respond to anyone and everyone.
How's the 2-day program structured?
So the first day is kind of like a more presentation focused day where we go in and we tell them about like, we define revenues and expenditures. We walk them through like how big the New York City budget is, and when they found out that the New York City budget was $112 billion, I'm telling you, like all the students in the room were gasping. And then we also tell them about the mayor's office, city council, comptroller's office, and then our own office. So some of those budget actors. And then we get them started on the activity where they'll do some research on their own city council member and design their presentations. And then the second day is really focused on presenting and making an argument for why funds should be reallocated to that certain policy priority. Issues they really care about, especially when it comes to like education or parks or any spending category like that.
And is this after school or during school or how?
We've done both, but we actually primarily have been going into civics classrooms in New York City high schools. We've also done a couple after-school programs, and we're also talking to Summer Rising too, if that's of interest too.
Is it a sign-up process or?
So usually I've just been coordinating with the teachers directly, and that's honestly the easiest people to schedule with because they know like the ins and outs of the school schedule. But I'm happy to work with anyone that wants to bring it to their school too.
Bert, summer interns, do you have any interns that between, especially after junior year? Point of interest for students.
Yeah, of course. There's some people that are already interested in applying because we brought the budget model to them, but we do keep in touch with the students too that we've gone to. And we do have summer internships coming up too. So it's a really great opportunity for people to connect with people that work in city government.
That's fantastic. Really,
Is there a particular kind of support that you would need from this group?
Really just connecting with schools. You know, I've tried like cold calling or emailing principals and I know they're super busy. So I think like bringing it to community boards and having you guys make that connection is really the biggest helpful thing for me.
So there is a desire to get more students to participate?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Do you have a capacity or a max that you could?
No, I would just probably get in touch with the school directly and see what availability looks like, but I'm open to scheduling with however many schools.
and how many hours each day?
So it would be, each module is about an hour, so 2 hours total. Yeah, so
2 hours a day?
2 hours total. So 1 hour the first day and 1 hour the second day.
Oh, so 2 days, a total of 2 hours?
Yeah.
Yes,
Is the
it takes up a
commitment.
period of class then,
Mhm.
probably.
I think you have someone from Stuyvesant in the room, right? Yeah.
If you wanted to do it at Sky, I think that there are many, like, we have like other presenters that have come and done something like this, and like, since there are so many kids and so many kids who want to be involved, like, we as a school want to do. I can't speak for the whole school, but I can definitely talk to like at least my government teacher and different.
Also, yeah, if you want to also share my contact details, my email's in the presentation. Feel free to email.
That's fantastic. Thanks for taking that and running with it. It'd be great if you could do it being
Yeah.
a student. Um,
And what's the best thing to share with administrators, teachers? Like, is it this presentation?
If you want, I could send Lucy like a little follow-up email with just a summary and then highlight some of our student work, so that way you can.
Something
send
we
it
can just
directly to-
forward? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
There's gonna
The
be a
students
lot
have
of
been
interest
also,
in this.
like, just from my experience, they've been a little bit worried about like, what does the future look like with, the federal changes. And so giving them these kind of like concrete action steps and letting them engage with the city budget is really amazing to see, like, how excited they are about it too.
I'm sure. I'm sure. That's fantastic and very needed. Programs like this are very popular with our kids, and there aren't that many. So, thanks for thinking
Yeah.
to come to us.
And this leads to like other kinds of financial literacy, I think, as well. Because they definitely can tie it into personal literacy and financial literacy. And think about the ways to prioritize their own, ways in which they manage their money, because, I don't know, we didn't learn a lot about personal finance.
No, I didn't hear anything about
Growing up.
that.
Yeah, like we learned about the economy, but not like how to manage your own finances.
So when they have this debate, what's the ending? Do they all have to reach a conference, do they all have to reach a compromise on how to allocate this $100?
Yeah, so at the end, the students actually vote on who has the best proposal, and that's the one that goes forward. And obviously, it's a very simplified way, like, module or like discussion how the city budget actually works, but we kind of wanted to like introduce the democratic element too in the module.
Now, can they apportion the funds? Or it's winner take all?
They can like, collaborate too, and, different agencies, like, for example, there was one group that wanted to cut the NYPD budget, and then the NYPD group was, giving a response to them, so it was really like a spirited debate too between the groups.
Anybody else? Thank you. So
Thanks,
nice.
Hannah.
Thanks for your patience getting this scheduled.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, this is such a beautiful view, and I really enjoyed being here, so,
Well, we'll definitely be in touch.
okay, great.
So we'll put you on some emails with everybody and get it rolling.
Okay, awesome.
Feel free to stay if you.
Yeah, I might say.
Absolutely, and don't feel obligated, but you're more than welcome. Is Kelly with us yet? Kelly McGuire wasn't able to come in person. He had something that came up, but he is going to present or talk to us about with his updates, but I'm gonna just keep my eye on the computer. So what I think we'll do is we can start this discussion that Desi's gonna run for us on, for those of you who were at the Quality of Life meeting. In fact, show of hands, who was at the Quality of Life meeting with the shelter discussion? The one that's going in next to Peck Slip School. Anybody? Okay. So I was there. It was obviously a very spirited discussion. The way that I'll just hand this off for Desi to then roll with it is just to say that the stance from the school and the community thus far, the takeaway from that resolution was that we are not opposed to a shelter. Obviously, in our neighborhood, we just opened one on Washington Street. We weren't even opposed as a board to a family shelter on Peck Slip. But the shelter that's opening next to Peck Slip, and by next to Peck Slip, I mean it shares a wall with the school, is a men's shelter. And it's a men's shelter that allows the men to come and go as they please during the day. And it's a shelter that encompasses rehabilitation, both the substances and mental health issues. So, again, I think that the discussion's centered around the fact that we are very much in favor of shelters. We're in favor of men's shelters. We just aren't in support of a shelter in that particular location with that shelter demographic because of the obvious issues with elementary age children out, you know, because they have if you guys remember, they have a play street. So the kids are outside in front of the school all day at recess. And so there were great concerns about that combination. So that is pretty much how the resolution shook out. And what we are now being charged to do is to look at this from a youth perspective.
Alicia, we want to stop.
Okay, great. So we can pick up after Kelly. So hold those thoughts. And
Put a pin in that.
oh,
Put a pin in
Karen's
there.
there too. Great. Hey, Kelly.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm coming to you live from my son's skateboard shop.
So good. I love that montage.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for being willing to go to Plan B.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. No problem at all.
We appreciate it. We always love talking to you. And we really just want to get an update on, you know, what we talked about last year, some of the new curriculum initiative, the curriculum initiative, and then really anything you want to let us know. I'm sure there are people curious about cuts to education and the new administration, seeing what that trickle down might look like in terms of its impact on District 2, whatever you'd like to bring to us.
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks for having me. So I guess a couple of things just in regard to curriculum. We're going to be entering our third year as a district, using a math curriculum in middle school called Illustrative Math. And we will be entering then our second year in grades K through 5 using a district-wide curriculum, Wit and Wisdom. That is a core curriculum, but we also have in our early grades a foundational literacy program, mostly foundations, that is used across all of our schools to really build and bolster phonics and fluency and vocabulary building in the early grades. As a part of those two big citywide initiatives, we have had support from some coaching that has been funded and supported by our central team, our central office. Our schools have had coaches that have come into the building to support that foundational literacy work and the core curriculum in literacy grades K through 5, and this math work in middle school. We know that the funding for that coaching is going to continue next year, but eventually we're going to have to do this on our own. So we're working really hard to build capacity, not just of the teachers who are in the classroom, but also of coaches and school leaders in our schools, and the people who work at the district team level to help to support schools. So we're trying to really build structures in place so these curricula are built to last, and that we'll be able to continue to grow and get better and better at it each year. So that is, it's been exciting. It's been a ton of work for both for teachers, of course, like who are going to be, who have been implementing brand new curricula, but also school leaders thinking about how they're organizing the resources in their schools to support this work. And then also just really thinking about how it is that we're communicating and getting information out to families in regard to what the experience has been for kids in schools. So it's been a busy year, but I'm really happy with how these curricula are going, and we're seeing a lot of great evidence of student growth in our schools, both academically, and kids are beginning to really enjoy the texts that are being used as a part of the core curricula in elementary school. They're finding them really exciting. There's a lot of engaging topics that are being discussed So that's continuing, and we're going to keep working on that both through the spring and summer, and start another new year next year with all of that. In regard to cuts and things like that we're hearing coming in the form of what we're hearing at the federal government and how that might be trickling to our schools. I would say that we haven't quite seen that yet, but our schools haven't received their budgets yet for the 25-26 school year. Everybody's following things closely in Albany to see what which projects and programs are going to continue to be funded. I will share with you all that some of our schools got some very good news today in regard to additional funding that they are receiving to help them come in compliance with the state class size law. We just received that information today, this afternoon, like 3 hours ago. There is going to be a press conference tomorrow to share more of that. So I'm sure over the next few days, you'll get a lot more specifics about that. But we had over 30 schools apply for that funding. And it's going to be exciting to see what our schools are going to be able to do with that to come into compliance and really take advantage of the new class sizes. So that's really exciting. But I think, more to come on, some of the most high profile things that have been coming out of the federal government or out of Washington. We haven't quite seen what that is, any implications of that in our classrooms, or excuse me, in our schools in regard to funding right now. But yeah, we're excited about the work that we're doing, and I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about any topics that might be on your all's minds or those of your constituents.
So nice to hear some good news. Is the money coming in from the state for class size, or it's not feds, right?
Yeah, the state. Yep.
The state. Okay, great. Do you know how much it is?
I don't know. I know that the closest thing that I can get to dollar amount right now is just what the different schools needed. Different schools had different capacities to come into compliance with the class size law. So some schools, this between the number of students that were in their building and the number of free rooms, they could only do it in a couple of grades. So their request and application only requested, a couple of additional teachers. Some schools have had quite a bit of space in their buildings, and so they felt pretty strongly that they could come into 100% compliance, but knew that they needed maybe 10 teachers to help make that happen using the new rooms, opening additional sections per grade level. But I'm really happy to share that even those schools that had a much heavier lift in terms of needing large numbers of teachers, really in our district, that has come through for the most part, it seems. So yeah, it's exciting. There's going to be a lot of planning, going to be a lot of hiring, and so whereas there's lots to do between now and the open of school in the fall, but thankfully we have some time.
That's great. Is there any funding being put towards new building in the cases where schools have zero room to add any sections?
Yeah, I have not. There are projects that the district planning office and the SCA have had on their projected list of buildings to be built. There are 3 of them, and there was one that was supposed to begin, like ground was supposed to be broken, I think in 2025. We haven't seen that yet. That was in Hanover Square, I think was that one. There's another one planned for Hudson Yards. but we're not, these are pretty far off in the way of planning, but they are out there. And so, maybe we will begin to hear something about this in the coming.
Elementary, K to 8, 6 to 8, no idea on the.
Both. There was one elementary school, one middle school, and I think one K to 8 was the plan.
Great.
I have to reference the plans to get more specifics on that.
Okay, great. That's fantastic news. Okay, anybody else have questions? Morton? I'm sorry, Andrew was first.
So just, I guess, two questions. First, as it relates to compliance with class size, you mentioned 30 schools applying for funding. Is that representative of the challenge we have across the city, or is that phase one and there's more to come?
Well, what I'll say is that in District 2, we have a greater challenge than in many other districts because we have more students. In our district, we have not lost the number of students that many districts have across the city. And so, there are very few places in District 2 where the schools are open and we're seeing 5, 10 empty rooms, but that is the case in some parts of the city, that especially parts of the city where families have chosen to go to charter schools or aren't living anymore. But District 2 is always going to be a challenge. It was always going to be a challenge for District 2 to come into compliance with the new class size law. So we saw a lot of our principals, and we encouraged a lot of our principals to apply for this funding, and many of them took us up on it. And so the 30 schools, the plans that they applied, that they created, the new teaching staff and the funding that is going to be allocated, it's not going to get us to 100%, but it's going to get us a whole lot closer. And I think will probably enable us to come into compliance over the next 2 years. It's just when we have to hit that 100% mark that it's going to be another lift that we'll have to do. So I hope I answered your question with that.
You did. Thank you.
Sure.
And then a second quick, I don't know if it's a quick question or not, and if there isn't a short answer, I'm happy to follow up offline. But you mentioned the new curricula across the city. Can you just describe the training that is in place for teachers to get up to speed on how to teach the new curricula?
Yeah, for sure. It's a good question, and it's it's easy in terms of describing like the different categories of work that we're doing. It is challenging in terms of really being able to do it in classrooms. But what I'll say is that it began last year about this time. We were asked to choose between one of 3 different curricula. We had to make that decision in January. Starting in April, May, we worked with the publisher of the new curricula to enroll every single one of our teachers in grades kindergarten through 5 in 3 days of professional learning. That was really just, to get the ball rolling. And along with that, all of our school leaders had to participate in a similar professional learning experience. So that was then over the summer. We had a number of workshops that we facilitated. We had some access to a coaching partner. So every district had to select a coaching partner with whom to work. The coaching partner that we selected was actually the publisher of the curriculum that we used. That sounds kind of like a no-brainer, but there's a lot of different coaching organizations out there. But we picked the one that published the curriculum, as we thought that not only were they really responsive to our initial questions, but we thought that maybe they would know the curriculum best. And so they provided some workshops for our teachers over the summer. Then, starting in the fall, each school had to create a implementation team. So it was the principal, the assistant principal, a few teacher leaders from the school, and then they worked together to plan out what we call coaching days. These are days in which a professional coach from Great Minds, who is our partner organization, came into schools and they conducted both one-on-one coaching with individual teachers, as well as coaching with teams, like a grade level team. The fifth grade team might get together with the coach for a couple of hours, and then the fourth grade team would get together. That kind of coaching and planning took place for the first part of the year, maybe the first third of the year, and then those coaches really started spending more time in classrooms, helping teachers identify when they were really using the curriculum and all of the resources, and pointing out where it is that they could bring additional resources in to support the teaching and learning in the classroom. And then, so that was all there. We've done a whole bunch of work on the district team to help pull and create experiences for teachers in school A to go see teachers in school B, or for school leaders in a group of schools to go see and hear how a school leader in another building has organized the learning for their educators. It's been so interesting, just as an aside, like to think about how it is that you create this organizational change on such a big, level. We have, several thousand teachers in our schools, and lots of school leaders, over 150 school leaders in our schools, between principals and assistant principals, and so it's been quite the lift. But like I said, I'm pretty excited and proud of where it is that we're at after being close to finishing our first year with the curriculum. But I'm happy to share more if you want to follow up offline too.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Martin?
Yeah, hi Kelly, good evening.
Hi.
Thanks for
How are you?
coming.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm glad you could make it. I want, my question is, first is a bit of a statement, then as a question. Anecdotally from, my own son and my son's school, I think the new curriculum is very engaging for the kids, and they get excited to learn the topics. They go from one topic to another, as obviously, some other people might not be familiar with the way it works. Right now, they're doing American Revolution and the Revolutionary War, and the kids are really engaged in it. They went to Francis Tavern, and they saw the museum there, and they related it to the topics that they're reading. They do these projects of demonstrations and things like that. I'm wondering if there was some advocacy going on at one point, that there was some change.org petition that was circulated, that people were saying that this is not working, or they wanted to go back to the old curriculum. Has that died down? I haven't heard anything about that since that was originally circulated. And what do you hear about that?
Well, I'll say, like, first and foremost, I think that we, part of doing this well is that we always have to keep our ear to the ground and understand what parents are thinking and feeling, what kids are experiencing, how they're feeling about it. So the work is definitely ongoing in terms of making sure that families that do have concerns are having the chance to both express those concerns and hopefully have them addressed. I will say that when some of what you were talking about, the petition and things started piping up, it was very, very early on in the school year. And, we put out a survey to families. We got a few hundred responses back from that survey. you know, the responses back. And I will just say, you know, we have just under 15,000 elementary school kids in the district. So when we get a few hundred surveys, this, you know, they certainly doesn't speak for every single child, but, you know, it is like a sample of perspectives. The feedback that we got was really mixed. A lot of families said that they just really hadn't had the chance to get to know the curriculum yet. And a few families were really down on it, and then a few families were really, really up on it. So we did this series of 3 online workshops for families over the course of 3 Fridays, and the recordings of those workshops are posted on our website under Family Resources. We, you know, tapped into coaches from great minds, our principals, and a lot of teachers. And the intent was really to try to, you know, open up the classroom, open up the teachers' planning, give people insight into what was being experienced by kids in the classroom. And we thought that, well, we didn't just think, but I will say we haven't heard as much feedback. We haven't heard any feedback on the negative side since then. That being said, I know that we need to continue, you know, working on this. This is not like a, you know, we do a few workshops and then we're done with it. Every child is going to be going through different grade levels and experiencing new things. But I do think a big part of it is that, you know, the curriculum it asks kids to do a lot. It's not, it's hard. Like the work is hard. And, but we think that's good. Kids were being challenged in ways that maybe in some schools they weren't challenged before. You know, when you have a new curriculum for teachers, it takes a minute to figure out how to do it well. But, you know, we're seeing great things from our teachers, and we think that that's having an impact on how kids are perceiving the curriculum and experiencing it, and how they're talking about the curriculum and what they're learning with their parents. So.
I think it's great. We feel very supportive. And hopefully whatever we can do to help support, we'd love to continue to do.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else have, Andrew?
Well, if someone else has questions, I don't want to go a second round.
Go ahead.
So, sorry if this is a basic question, but how will you measure effectiveness? And if the answer is testing, has testing methodology evolved at all over the years, or is it sort of standardized testing methodology or process that we've had in place for years?
Yeah. Well, I hope that, you know, like the way that we look at, you know, any kind of measure of student achievement, where we, you know, try to look at it through multiple measures. The state testing is an important part of that battery of assessments that we look at to see how kids are doing. But we're also doing things like looking at student work. It is a big part of how it is that we're evaluating the performance of kids in schools on a bit of a smaller scale, right? On a school that might pull together, you know, 50 different pieces of student work and really look at that work in comparison to exemplary work, which we do have. Our coaching partners provided some of that, but we've also really been able to pull together some exemplary work into our schools. And looking and seeing how it is that kids are doing with that is really, really important. There are other ways that we are looking at and measuring the effectiveness of this and how students are responding to it. You know, if you think back to the elementary school report card, I mean, I guess for all of us, there were probably a bunch of different versions of what the elementary school report card looked like. But, you know, it wasn't just in New York City, it wasn't generally just like English, you know, math. There was like English, and then there were several different subcategories of how students were doing. Those subcategories are also really important, and looking to report cards as measures of how kids are doing overall has been really, really helpful. The curriculum that we chose infuses Socratic seminar into the curriculum at a very early age, where kids are really leading and gathering evidence and then leading discussion in both small and large groups through Socratic seminar. And that's one of the subcategories, that we'd see on the student's report card. So not just looking at that from an individual standpoint, but looking at how students are engaged in, listening and speaking across a school or across a grade level, and then, expanding that to a few different schools are other ways that we're looking at it. But again, I do think that the test is it's an important benchmark of how things are going, and it does give you a sense of how things are going in the district in comparison to, other cities around the state.
Right. Thank you.
The ELA tests are coming up at the end of the month, right? For the
Yeah,
fifth and
right after spring break.
I'll keep our fingers crossed.
I don't think we saw you after, we saw you just before October, so we didn't hear how the whole acceptance rate shook out this year. Any more success with our admissions both into middle school and into high school?
Yeah. You know what? I'd have to look back and get the exact numbers on that, but I hate to just say it went really well, but it did go really well. I'm sure that I know that there are individuals, both children and their families, that are not happy with the choice. But we have a lot of options in middle school that families see as real matches for their children. And I think our percentage was north of 95% of kids receiving one of their top 3 choices in middle school. And so that's really something for us to be proud of, I think, that, being able to provide this kind of landscape of different options for families has been really important. And then high school was really positive too. So I can definitely come back with better numbers on that. But it's
We
been
didn't hear anything, which is like a first.
I know.
So-
I hate to point to that, but it is a thing. It's a reasonable. It's a real measure.
And I was wondering if enrollment was down or whether the process has really smoothed out. And so if it's the latter, that's phenomenal news,
Yeah. No, our enrollment is actually up. It's up 7% from last year, and we definitely have seen some families leave, and I can't say specifically where those families are, which schools they're coming from. I can say that the number of students who are living in temporary housing has dropped in our district. We know that they're closing some of the shelters in our district, and we were serving a number of kids who were living in those shelters. But we're also seeing some real growth in our kindergarten numbers, which is very exciting, because we're hoping that indicates that there's a trend of families who may have moved out of the city during the pandemic coming back to the city. So
that's great to hear.
yeah.
Well, Kelly, thanks so much. That was incredibly informative. We're really appreciative. We're happy for all the good news. And we'll be in touch with any questions, but otherwise we'll be in touch to have you back in the fall.
Anytime.
Thanks so much again for making time.
For sure. Good to see y'all. Take care.
Thank you, Kelly.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. All right, next, we're going to, we started talking about this resolution. Not everybody was here. Morton was not here. So I'll just go quickly back over it. Morton, you were at the Quality of Life meeting, I know, because I saw you there, where they passed the resolution. And what we had discussed is that, the committee was in favor of shelters, even a shelter in that location. The problem was the kind of shelter it was. And there was a lively discussion about how shelters are sited. And once we understood the process about how they're sited, it was easier to understand how that mistake was made. It is a very strange setup that Desi has a little bit more information on that she'll share with us. But it's still, you know, we feel as though that should be, at least I'm going to propose that that should be a therefore be it resolved. It should be a whereas, that it is, and I think it is in the quality of life resolution, that I think we should consider just adapting and then add to their resolution. But you'll see that there's a point there where they talk about the inherent problems in the process of getting shelters sited. I think that's a really important point that we all need to understand deeply to write this thing well. And then, you know, we're being called upon to look at this from a youth perspective. Now, the quality of life conversation did include youth. I mean, all the parents were there, so they were all talking about it. But, you know, we can talk about things like, you know, what the experience is like to be in the play yard and how often the play yard is used, which they didn't know. They didn't know that these kids are out in front of the school the whole day. If this is a men's shelter and the men are free to come and go as they please and there's rehabilitation going on, we would want to just be looking specifically at what that experience is going to be like for the children and what the risks are. They did ask us at that meeting to tell them what we could want that would make it better for them to go forward with their plan. And if it was a monitor that was outside, if it was a barrier of some sort, that was pretty much thrown out because it's not incredibly feasible. There's no funding for it. I don't even think the shelter had the ability to have a proctor outside all day. And they couldn't give us the answer, most importantly. So unless there was a definitive answer that could actually happen, for me, that wasn't something that we would entertain. So at the end, it came down to the fact that this was not the location to have this kind of shelter. And so this is where we are now. Tammy did sort of a debriefing on the meeting points that I just handed to Desi, so she can sort of walk us through how to approach getting our resolution together.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think anything short of it not being a safe haven shelter is really the answer that everybody would prefer. And so I think the resolution has to address the issues that come about as a result of having this kind of shelter. As you said, I think people have been very amenable to having one, but this particular kind, particularly, it's not even necessarily that it's in proximity to a school, that it abuts a school,
Yeah.
is really, it feels so ill-planned, ill-prepared. And I think, you know, some of the notes that Tammy had given is in the selection process, it really is a response to an RFP between a developer and a shelter partner. So there really isn't a lot of consultation or assessment as to the area. On the part of the shelter, they assess whether they can come in and, you know, remodel or redo whatever the space is. But in terms of a social service, particularly with, who is it, DHS? It doesn't seem to have been any consultation there. And so it presents this real challenge that we have, because it's like, if our response is, well, can you do this or can you do that? It sort of makes it seem like we're okay with them being there. when the reality is that we really do not want this particular kind of shelter in this location.
Are they
Yes.
going forward with this regardless of what we say?
Not necessarily. It isn't a done deal, which is why Tammy handed this to us.
Yeah.
Because
They've been looking at this for a long time
And responding as though it is.
objected to it for months, and they're like, yeah, well, this is the location. Do they have an alternate location?
That's never been discussed.
It's just,
I've been deep diving in this for quite a while, and, the way that this works, as, Christian mentioned, is that there's an open RFP, request for proposal, so that people who have a potential site come to DHS and say, and they partner with, the developer partners with, Breaking Ground or some other operator. And they then come to DHS with a proposal to operate a shelter at the specific location. The city is not out there looking for locations. The locations come to the city.
Right.
And unfortunately, it was actually described at the quality of life meeting as a real estate transaction. And there's all kinds of, emanations and possibilities, or, what's the word, not direct evidence, but circumstantial evidence. I knew you would give lawyers. All kinds of circumstantial evidence which might indicate that there's a lot of political influence that went into the selection or the awarding of this, a shelter at this site, because the developers were very close to the mayor. And they were fundraisers and contributors, and they've been very active, not just here, but elsewhere in the city, in partnering in a business for profit developing shelters. So they came upon the site, it was the former Hampton Inn, didn't require a lot of renovation to make it into a shelter. They partnered with Breaking Ground, they came to DHS and said, we'd like to have a shelter here. Now, was there ever any indication or consideration by DHS whether this was an appropriate site for the shelter, other than on a monetary basis or a financial basis, that they could operate a shelter here under the financial constraints that were put before them? Breaking Ground has been criticized for operating shelters where their management is making a large amount of money being paid to do this business, and the developer gets a guaranteed income because they basically lease the shelter, the operation to Breaking Ground. Breaking Ground then gets the contract from the city, and the developer gets a guaranteed return on investment, which they then go and monetize and borrow against and find new places to operate.
because it was already a hotel,
That's
it's
right.
one of the easiest
Yeah.
places.
But sir, I'm not sure if I heard the answer to the question you posed. Did DHS or anyone do an assessment as to the appropriateness of the type of shelter? And if they
Well, no.
haven't, how do we force
Well,
that?
that-
Because that was the whole point, is
That-
that
yeah.
they find these specific places and then go to DHS and do it, they don't look for alternate sites.
No, I know that, but
I've
is it, do
never
we
heard-
know, or is it our speculation that DHS didn't look at it and say, okay, this is a men's rehabilitation shelter, we're stamping it for approval?
Well, it was deemed a shelter, it wasn't deemed a men's shelter until
Right.
later.
Mm-hmm.
correct.
So, all of the, when
They
DHS.
gave it a shelter, and I do remember them saying at this meeting that they then go and look at what shelters are needed where. This is where I get confused, because they said that
That there was a need for
that
this.
there was a need for this kind of shelter, but it was after they had already done the deal. I think that's really what we're faced with here, is that they said that there is enough women's shelters in Lower Manhattan. I don't know of any
I
of
don't know.
women's shelters.
I know of the old Holiday Inn over on what Greenwich is both, right?
It's both.
And then the 100 Washington.
I think
I think
that's,
that's a mention.
I think that's men's also. I don't think
I
there's
don't know
any
where-
women's shelters down here.
But sorry, and I don't mean to get granular, but when you say deal is done, if I was following the prior conversation, the deal was this is a suitable location for a shelter.
Well,
Correct, without
That's
determining
suitable.
which kind of shelter it is.
Correct.
So by
Right.
the time they say,
Or
yes,
feasible,
you can
whatever.
put a shelter here, which of course we were not included in that conversation either.
At all,
That happened before.
So,
So it
so,
was done and then we found out about it.
right.
correct.
well, they announced it last June, right before
Right,
the
the school-
schools broke. And Tammy got notice of it, the electeds got notice of it, and the school got notice of it right at the end of June when everybody was about to go on vacation. However, I don't know the answer personally. Supposedly, I heard that at the quality of life meeting, that the contract was signed between the city and Breaking Ground. Does that mean it's a done deal? It has to still be approved? I don't know technically where that stands. But there was, one of the parents came to Quality of Life and said they heard that it's supposed to open now in September. I don't know if that's a true statement or not, but the process as it goes is that the developer contracts with Breaking Ground and signs a lease, then they go, then the city doesn't deal with the developer, they deal with Breaking Ground, and Breaking Ground enters into negotiations to have a contract with the city, the DHS. And the answer to your question is a mystery.
It is a
Because-
mystery,
because-
because they know that there's opposition to the shelter, because they were here and they saw it. And so that hasn't prompted them to reassess
It's
or,
a business contract.
right.
Exactly.
Is it?
It's
And
a
so
business contract.
whether or not they knew it before, or whether or not they were given the opportunity to assess whether it was appropriate or not, because it seems as though they acted on the fact that it was viable. It's like, oh, we can do this. And so then they,
But Andrew, I think your question is if it's appropriate. Now, see, this is all speculation because we're not there.
right,
Well,
like
the DSS
appropriate or viable?
Why
Because-
viable? Because I think they just looked at it from does it meet the standard of
Does it meet the
space
standard,
per,
right.
per person that they plan, you know?
Right.
you know, that's all that they look, but not like in the.
Whether
context
it's
of- of a
appropriate.
Specific in a certain community
right.
adjacent to.
Yeah, I guess the way I come at this, and maybe I'm just looking at it the wrong way, I understand there's an element of a real estate transaction from the perspective of siting. But then it has to move to the specific use case, and if this site is fit for purpose for the proposed use case.
As well.
And again,
And
the,
we've
the
given
real
that
estate
to them,
transaction to me,
and they
that
haven't.
sailed.
Yeah.
The focus is the use case for this space.
Well, I'm not endorsing the real estate.
No, I
I'm just
understand that,
describing
but-
how I understand it.
and we put that in their lap, and there hasn't been any.
Here's the overreaching thing that we have to address in the resolution. At this moment, they are not required to do this. It's just, this is why we were talking about developing something that's like we have with alcohol and cannabis shops and their proximity to schools. Because as of today, there are no requirements for proximity to children with shelters. I was really surprised to hear that. And that is something we can take on in this resolution today. And it's not that we still can't affect change with this deal. If we scream and yell loud enough and we make them so miserable, they are likely to at least think about this. But they're not required to. They can go ahead
Clearly.
with this shelter because there's no one telling them that they can't.
Well, also, once the contract's been, the money's been exchanged.
It has been exchanged.
I don't necessarily care.
Well, the contract may have been signed, but I think it still technically has to be approved by, the controller, whether he, I don't know where that stands. But what I wanted to say is that when they had the proposal to build the project, construction 250 Border Street, which is right across from Peckslip School, one of the things they have to do is like any environmental impact statement. But there's nothing that requires anything of the nature of what the impact is gonna be on the school to open the shelter next door. And there should be, in my opinion, that's.
And so we're writing that in now,
Yeah,
and then we're trying to drive home the point that this would be a disaster. And ask them to go back, seeing that the deal is done, find an appropriate use for the space. And, you know, it really is gonna be a heavy lift because they're not, it's just like Stellar in Vornado in this building. They have the right to do it.
So with the contract being signed, there's always ways to get out, though there might be there will be a financial penalty. So I don't want us to think that though it was signed, that the city can't get out of it with some financial penalty.
I mean, we believe it's signed, we don't know for sure, but that's what we're told.
I mean, the more that this process goes through, like, once they open, I think that's gonna be even more difficult, because once they, set it open, that's gonna be more difficult. So the more that we do now before it opens, the better. Also, Andrew, they use this, I think in case Morgan didn't mention it, they use this, emergency RFP process for at least the last 15 years. So they go through this process. So they waive the ULURP process, they waive going through city planning commission, that's how they get away with this, using the emergency RFP process.
Appreciate that knowledge.
But I-
Just added to my knowledge.
Okay.
But I think coming back to something Tricia said, it would seem to be a really heavy lift for us to propose negating a contract. It wouldn't seem as heavy a lift to push on the proposed use of the space. They can still proceed with a shelter if that's what's been
right,
contracted.
because we haven't
We don't need to unwind
proposed a
that,
shelter.
right?
It's this
Exactly.
particular kind.
We could also go with, as Tricia was starting, say that there are no guidelines for a minimum distance from a school. And I think that should be put in for Peck Slip as well as other schools,
100%.
throughout the city.
The same concerns
Yeah.
that triggered people to impose distance requirements for liquor and cannabis should certainly
Right.
Will have
apply.
any of the elected.
It's the case of shelter.
They are, Chris Marte is full on with this. I mean, I will say, I think this would have opened by now had they not had the pushbacks. I think that the resolutions, the meetings have been effective, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're looking at their options. I think the big thing that we should also include is the fact that while it might not be the shelter that's most needed downtown, that a family shelter could be placed there instead of a neighborhood they're considering a family shelter for, and with a better location and swap it, even though it's not the number one choice. There obviously is a need for family shelters, and if
But we would be fine with the family shelter as opposed to a men-only shelter?
I think that we could phrase it by saying, while we would prefer not to have a shelter in this location, knowing that this deal is done and knowing at the time of the deal that it was for a shelter and that they didn't have to come to us previously. I do think we should say we would prefer not to have a shelter. We would encourage, like, one of it could be, we encourage the city to go back, find a better deal, do whatever they can to get out of this contract, find a better
And
tenant.
many of the families have said that they've been okay with the family
They
shelter.
have said that,
Because of the adjacentness to the school.
Yeah.
Because they feel like we could better serve the needs of people who were marginalized by having a school right there.
There's been a lot of advocacy.
yeah, so we could say the both. We would prefer this.
But if
If-
you're going to,
If you have to move forward with the shelter, given the terms of this deal, we support the Peck Slip families by saying a family shelter would at least be something that would be somewhat appropriate. And while it's not Lower Manhattan's number one need, in this case, we demand that you find a way to make that possible by exchanging, to another location.
I want to tell you, my background, where we previously lived, we had to deal with homeless shelter, and we went through the litigation and DHS, it'll zap your money, we keep on with injunctions and I'm hesitant to make the negotiations now. We should say what we want, or what we don't want immediately. Also, please we had a men's shelter where we lived, and then, we litigated, they change it to a women's shelter. I just want to say also, women's shelter also has its concurrent problems as well.
Right.
You know,
Well, we are actually being specific to
with
family.
family shelters, and I'm not as familiar with family shelters, but there could also be some problems as well. Look, I'm sympathetic to people needing shelter, but I really would prefer, from my standpoint, that the DHS should, or DSS should have a guideline of a distance from schools.
Yes.
I really believe that should be, I mean, if it's 500 feet like it is for cannabis shops, that still gives them many opportunities throughout the city. It's not like we're blocking them out from sections of, large swaths of land, but there needs to be a guideline that they have, because we don't want to have to defend saying it shouldn't be here. There have to be some parameters that they need limits first before they just go to communities and burden them.
Correct.
So a guideline for distance. I would also ask for some clarity on the process of the siting of a shelter. Or anything that's going to abut a school. There should be some,
Well, I mean, if it would take care of, if we put that 300 feet into
Yeah.
that, they wouldn't be able to cite that. They wouldn't be able to make that deal with the shelter. In the same way, they couldn't make that deal with a liquor store or a cannabis shop.
Where does the 300 feet come from?
It came from, it's so interesting that this was something that wasn't done at the same time where the other regulations were put in place. You can't have a food truck, for those of you who remember Food Truck Gate over at PS 234. There was a food truck that was backing up onto the sidewalk in front of 234 as the children were coming to school, almost hitting people. And I found deep down in New York City law that there's a peddler's clause that doesn't permit peddlers within 200 feet of any school. And the fact that they would prevent peddlers from being within 200 feet from the school and not deal with something like this
yeah.
is an oversight, and an important oversight. So I think that would be, action number one, is to just come right out and say, this needs to be added to the other parameters we have in place around schools and for this particular instance. And as a group, we can come up with anything we want. We can say absolutely no shelter of any kind here, or we can say, a family shelter only. You must recite the men's shelter. And that's what our discussion is going to be, from a youth perspective today.
I would also, I mean, I don't know if this weakens the other ask in terms of there being a spatial guideline, but also it has to be in their budget that they're providing some sort of security or monitor that does not come out of the budget of the school or the existing entity that's there.
Well, I
If-
mean,
if-
that would
if
mean
it's- if
someone
it's-
would have to be on the street the whole day because it's a play street,
So-
you know?
Here's some information, because
Like or something that, where they have to sweep, because if we're talking about needles and like, there has to be some budgeting item out of their budget that speaks to the security and also the cleaning and the sweeping of the street for needles.
Okay, you want
is
people
one
to
of
be
Senate.
outside
Mhm.
monitoring everybody, or do you want them to?
Yeah, I don't know if it's one or the,
I think every
It is-
business
too.
is required to clean up their sidewalk,
Mhm.
yes, it is, so
Mhm.
that's already there.
okay.
And you can just cite towards that.
But is there but is there a special consideration that has to happen for a shelter where we know that people are engaging with drugs? Like, is that a special ask?
I mean, I think,
Because they're gonna move, I mean, yeah, they'll move their trash and they'll make sure that they abide by recycling and those guidelines. But if we're also talking about, the possibility of there being, needles, like, I think that's an additional concern that exists.
Well, I mean, we certainly can ask for this. It was, as you know, it was discussed at that meeting that a monitor be out there full time. My concern is that they give us that, they're gonna push to have the men's shelter.
Then they'll
Yeah.
push that, right, so I
Well,
don't know if it weakens it
If
by
I could just
asking
bring
for
up
that.
some information, I've been, have the parents and the people at the school, they brought a lawsuit, so I have the docket number, so I can check it from time to time. Apparently,
In Supreme Court or federal court?
Supreme, Manhattan Supreme, I think Judge Van Doren of 250 Water Street fame and other fame as well has the case. But according to the latest filing, which I'm looking at right now, they did have a contract that has been signed, contract has been registered. The respondents, the city and Breaking Ground had moved to dismiss it because they claimed it was premature because there was no contract. So now there is a contract and they withdrew that motion and the case is in court and may some further hearing.
Can you see that contract?
Uh,
Are you gonna scroll?
no, the contract has not been uploaded, but I understand it's available.
Does the lawsuit stipulate if the contract cites the use case for the shelter? Does amends, does the,
We'd have to,
Does
the
the-
contract's not. up.
I have
but
to,
does the lawsuit reference if the contract discloses the nature of the shelter?
well, when the time the lawsuit was filed, there wasn't the contract hadn't,
And what are they suing them for?
they're claiming is, arbitrary capricious Article 78 proceeding that, that this city shouldn't have approved
Let's
the,
see, next number.
and that's number.
But can you give that to me in lay terms?
158621, 2020.
The city screwed up in moving forward with this.
Whenever there's a decision.
So what
by-
are they saying? It's a violation of our rights?
No,
It's a
whenever
violation
there's
of
a
our safety?
decision by a government body, the way for citizens or people who are affected by it to challenge it is to bring what's called a special proceeding, is called an Article 78 proceeding. And the allegation is that it shouldn't have been approved because the decision to approve it is called arbitrary and capricious. What does that mean? That-
Arbitrary and capricious, okay.
and what does that mean? It means that essentially based on the record before the government body.
I mean, it sounds specific,
It
it's
shouldn't be approved.
arbitrary and capricious.
Unfortunately, the litigation involving arbitrary and capriciousness has been, a lot of the challenges they've been, even if they're, the challenges upheld by the lower courts, the appellate courts have really narrowed the grounds to set aside a decision of a government agency. And like with the 250 Water Street, Elizabeth Street Gardens, the Two Bridges project, a lot of them have been challenged, and basically, the way it's been played out is that if the city goes through the process and here's the case for and against, and then makes a decision, the court is not generally gonna go behind the rationale for the decision as long as they went through the lawful process. That's generally been the case the last few years. And I've been involved in trying to advocate for a more in-depth review, but so far the courts have not been.
That happened with us. We did fair share because we had all these homeless shelters in our area and we challenged fair share. So we did the Article 78 too, and then also I should say, and then the city came back and said, they did an assessment and then everything was okay. And then it met the standard. The higher court didn't go against it. The city had to prove that it went through the process and then it satisfied the need.
Well, that's what happened with 250 Water Street. They got an approval from the Landmarks Commission and the people sued and they challenged that. And they said the Landmarks Commission shouldn't have approved it based on this, this, and this. And I think it was Judge Warren, but whoever was lower court said they shouldn't have approved it. But then it went up to the appellate court. The appellate court said, look, they went through the process, they heard the evidence, they heard everything. The process was legitimate and we're not gonna go behind the decision. And that was it.
All right.
So coming back to the resolution,
So, right,
we've got required
Guideline.
distance from a school, similar to what we have for liquor and cannabis. And the same
Which seems to
logic
be
and
what we
rationale
have.
should apply.
right.
Should we talk about how the environment's just potentially disruptive to the emotional state of young children and the disruption to their ability to learn? And if we're talking about youth and ed,
I would say, you know, first and foremost, that I would really focus on the fact that these children are outside. There's a recess period the entire day, because it's not the norm for children to be in front of the school all the time.
Right.
They send them out there in the winter in coats, you know, they're out. So I would say, you know, that in the whereas, and then, you know, I would just make it a no deal. Just say it so simply, just say, you know, with the children outside during the day and the men allowed to come and go as they please. And it being a rehabilitative
Right. I
shelter,
think that's key.
that this is not
Yeah.
a tenable situation,
Yeah.
and just make it very strong, you know, and not get into too many weeds, making it possible if they do this. I would just,
Yeah.
I would create some fear. You know, I think that's really the best way of going about, because the fear is real. And, you know, people, even if they're sitting outside the building, they might just sit there to get some sun, but let's say they aren't well.
Right.
You know, they're literally within 6 feet of these children. And the other thing about the Peck Slip Play Street is it's a temporary space. The cones are removed at the end of the day, cars, you know, it's not like it's fenced off. It's cones. So, and you've got one teacher out with the class of 26 kids. I don't think it's a good situation.
And then also kids walk to and from school, they have to walk by it. Not even just like the, street, they have to pass by it.
Right.
You know, it's just a recipe for
And
disaster.
that's what this petition is.
Yeah, because I mean, we do have, you're right, we do have some fifth graders walk themselves, and there might not be adults with them, especially at the end of the day.
Could we also reference the community outreach in the form of a lawsuit, numerous?
Absolutely.
Our Tammy's in here and so is our resolution. The Stevie one.
I mean,
Reference in the petition.
I would also, I mean, I do think we don't want to also perpetuate, you know, peddling and stereotypes about marginalized people. And so I do think that it's also important to include the concern for residents as well, to make sure that, you know, we want to make sure that the residents who are getting care are also getting the support of the community. And if this situation is as untenable as it is, they're not going to get that support. Like if we're wanting them to be well and rehabilitated and supported, it's best to do that in a shelter, in a location where they can get that.
I think that was a point in the other resolution. I mean, we can write one of our own from the start if you all want to do that, instead of supporting the quality of life resolution with just a few more whereases. Yeah. We could do that.
I don't mind
We could
adapting.
Start over and just make one another complete different resolution. Are we allowed to do that on the same topic?
Just decided on.
Okay. So who's in favor of that? Just developing one that's totally unique for us and not supporting the quality of life resolution, and just doing a full-on one with our own points.
Are we confident it would be different enough?
That would be my
It
concern.
doesn't need-
I don't mind.
It doesn't need to be
Playing off
different,
of it.
it'll still mirror the quality of life.
We could.
Yeah,
It's
just wonder if
like,
it'll have as
we
much
need
impact.
this, But as an educational standpoint, this is what we feel.
Yeah,
Cause now we want more people to be opposed to it. Now we have two committees as well as the whole CD.
right. Okay, so let's sketch out the whereases.
I'm trying to jot them down now.
Okay,
The residents won't be supported, and we can flush out what that sounds like, but it's important that they're supported in their recovery. And in this current situation, there's just too much opposition for them to be supported in the way that they need to be supported.
okay. I would be okay with that. I would probably, yeah,
The wording's gonna be important.
important.
Yeah. That's a delicate
Yeah,
one.
Lauren does that.
No, I know that.
And whereas, one of the whereases is that, you know, not only are the children walking past the shelter coming and going from school, but it's important to note that Peck Slip has a play street that is unprotected, where cones are put out when the children are at recess. And there are 6 recess classes per day. So they are outside in front of the school all day,
Do we have the hours?
9 to 3
I would state that.
Is that in the front or in the back?
in the front.
That's where the doors are.
Yeah.
Doors are-
Doors to the shelter.
Well, the door to the shelter and the door to the school
Are on the same street, yeah. So that should be a whereas. And then,
Distance requirement similar to
Mhm.
booze and drug.
yeah, whereas the city has strict requirements about the proximity of liquor stores and cannabis dispensaries and their distance from schools, we feel as though it's appropriate to establish the same for homeless shelters.
I think that's a little bit, to me, that's a little bit problematic. I think we could get into trouble like comparing a homeless shelter to a liquor store. or a
Well, no, but I think the point is that the city has restrictions for other things, there should be restrictions for this.
No, I hear that, but my sense is that, the issue should be what is the impact of the shelter going to be on the school? That you're gonna have a shelter that has a potential impact on the school, and you don't wanna have that, interfere with the school, so that there should be a distance requirement. But I think some people might take it the wrong way. If-
Well, how,
You need to reference the cannabis and the alcohol, just say we want 300 feet and let them, and.
I actually think it should be 500 feet, because that's what it is for
Whatever,
cannabis.
whatever.
Yeah,
Whatever the
because-
distance.
yeah, cannabis is 500.
Right, 6 miles for all of it.
well, perhaps we could make the reference that if this is a population that is tackling substances, it's important to recognize that we do have established guidelines for locations that have substances.
If
Rather
that's
than-
what the where is gonna be, if that's how you're gonna word it, then fine.
For some reason, someone has made the decision that having stores that sell alcohol and stores that sell cannabis are not suitable to be placed within distance to schools. I don't think it's, well, there may be some opposition, I don't think it's unreasonable to make that same statement for a shelter.
Neither do I.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think it's, again, the way you word it,
Yeah,
you know, by saying, you know, the city has parameters for substances in their proximity to schools, and we feel it's appropriate.
That's it, yeah.
If this shelter is gonna be a rehabilitation
Yeah.
center,
It is.
then they should be those same restrictions.
and again, I don't know how you attempt to word this, I don't know if it's relevant at all, I don't know if we know the statistics, but looking at recidivism rates for men's shelters, if it's higher than other types of shelters,
I wonder if that data will be available. It could be good to have it.
Well, I don't think there will be any type of, I mean, when you say recidivism, a shelter is not incarceration. A shelter is somebody who needs, help, and maybe they need help one time, maybe they need the help again.
Yeah, but can't you be ordered to stay in a shelter?
I don't know.
If you're under,
But I don't
if
think
you've
that's
been
this
ordered
type,
to go to rehabilitation.
but that's not this type of,
Right.
that's,
That was another point made at the meeting. Because there are some shelters where you can't leave the building. This is not that.
But there's a name for them.
Yeah. There
Maybe like
is.
halfway houses or, you know,
there should be a way to get the contract from the controllers.
It's a Blumen.
At the time they filed the case, it wasn't.
today. It
But
was fine to
the controller has a lot of links, and you can go through the controller's office. They talk about the contract being registered,
Yeah, yeah.
so it's on file. And I think a lot of the parents had looked at it. at the pop.
Okay, so we have those couple. We can also say whereas. The city RFP process,
Emergency RFP process.
emergency RFP process needs to be changed in regards to the siting of shelters, to give the community the opportunity to respond as to the appropriateness of the kind of shelter. Although we've just said no shelters within the proximity of the school, but I think that that's okay. We still want to
Or how
weigh
much of the
in.
use of,
To
the
allow
use
the
of building.
community to give input.
Yes, the
input
community should
to
be
the
able to give
use of-
input to any shelter
Just-
going into a neighborhood before it is a fait accompli.
And then also this, using this emergency RFP process, it waives the ULURP process to go in front of the community board and go to city planning. That's why they go through this, so they don't have to get the approvals.
Exactly.
Can we just say the use of space that's adjacent to a school? Of any space that's adjacent to a school? That there's community input?
Well, then the question, what is adjacent? So you have to define the
Yeah.
distance.
Yeah, is it kitty corner or is it directly next to, is it?
How are we describing this?
We want
Abut,
this
whether
is
it abuts?
abuts.
When you say describing this, meaning the
This
shelter
situation.
or the distance?
The distance,
It's
We're saying-
literally shares a wall next to.
so we're saying it abuts. That abuts a school.
But sorry, how is that being built into a whereas?
Yeah. The city's RFP process must give community the opportunity to respond to the use of any space that abuts a school.
So I think there is something in place except for an emergency RFP. That's when they get to override. And
So do we want
they
to
therefore
specifically
use that
say
all the
emergency?
time.
So we want to say the emergency
The
RFP
emergency
process?
RFP process does not currently not allow for community review, and that needs to be amended.
Is that gonna be that therefore be resolved that if there's an emergency RFP, then community needs.
Therefore, be it resolved, the community
Still
must
needs to be
review, yeah.
Community notice and feedback,
Mhm.
or procedure for community to provide.
Because with this one, they provided us notice like last July, right after the school year ended, so they provided notice, but if it were to ULURP, then they have to get the approval of, at least bring it to the community board and then through city planning and the borough president, but this way they wait, they can skip it,
Well, the
get
first-
notified, and that's it.
The first meeting, they told us the contract had already been signed though. So I don't remember them coming to us prior to making the deal. That's something we could check.
No, at the quality of life, they said it had not been signed, and
Ah.
then later on, now apparently it has been. But I remember specifically asking the representative of DHS whether the contract had been signed, and they and Breaking Ground had said at that point, at the initial meeting, that it had not yet been signed. And at the second meeting,
Sometime between February and March this year.
yeah, exactly.
So does that mean they did come before the community?
No, they did, it was like in September or
They did.
October, right, they did come to us.
There was a public hearing. It was over Zoom, and a lot of people testified. I made a statement. But apparently that was, let's say, going through the motions.
Well, again, so far they can do what they please. And I think that's why these parameters have to be in place. It shouldn't be like a charrette setup, which is what they have now. So I think that therefore be it resolved, I was suggesting about for emergency RFPs, they need to also have feedback from the community. If that's in place, then we don't have to put that in, because we are demanding that they don't cite shelters, within whatever it is, 500 feet, 300 feet of a school. So we may not need that extra piece if they did in fact bring it. Because if, if we can't, the only thing that will help us prevent something from happening is if they're required to do it.
Right.
Like right now, it's a no deal. You can't put cannabis or alcohol near a school. It's off the table. Bye-bye. But if something is just a notification and discussion, to your point, as long as they go through that process, they can do as they please. So we have to weigh out the importance of putting that in the therefore be it resolved.
Well, that's why I also said the use of, any use of the space. Because what if it's something else that it maybe creates some issue? A noise issue, an environmental,
Where we require any
I say any use.
lease being taken near a school to be reviewed.
Well, this one is just for homeless shelters, right? Just so that's narrows it, right?
That is what the point of this was, yes. That's it, that's a worthy discussion.
Would it be any use?
We could just stay super focused on this and then talk about one
Okay,
for youth going forward. I mean, how many people would like to do that? To include something about
because if
having,
it's not this, it may very well be some other thing that comes up.
I don't disagree with that. I propose to tackle that as a separate follow-up.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think this is such an important issue to the community.
yeah,
We.
but I like it, Desi. I think
Yeah, no,
we
I
could do
agree.
it soon
I
too,
agree.
okay.
you know?
I definitely agree. Good
Um,
thought.
I mean, the shorter this is and the stronger in some ways, I
Good
think it's gonna be better.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got,
Yeah, read us back, you have.
the city has strict requirements for substances like cannabis and liquor. With proximity to schools, we feel it's important to establish guidelines for,
You're definitely
Hmm.
drafting. Missed it. Putting that on,
we're gonna partner on that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm volunteering.
Great.
And giving the report at the full
Yeah.
board.
We feel it's important to establish guidelines for distance
Not to
for
Step on anybody's toes.
residents, for shelter residents who may be engaging with such substances. Which is, I think,
One way.
okay.
I mean, those are the points that we want.
Well, does that? Can we just leave it at shelters? Well, the only reason I'm asking, I know we're making a statement, we don't want any shelters there. But if they are gonna move forward, were we gonna say we'd rather see a family shelter?
That's where this started, because that's what the quality of life, we were mimicking their recommendation or their resolution. We don't have to do that. We could just stick with this if we want and just say, we have parameters in place for liquor stores and cannabis dispensaries in the regards to the proximity to a school, and we feel, given the rehabilitative nature of shelters, and, family shelter might still have that component. We don't know, but we could just say rehabilitative nature,
Mm-hmm.
that we feel is the same thing should be required here. And really have that be the driving point. And in terms of this particular sighting, since that's for the next sighting, and seeing that this contract has been signed, we can say, therefore be it resolved, that if the contract has already been signed on this deal, that if no other use is possible, that we demand that the only shelter that would be put in this space would be a family shelter. Or we could just not include that and just demand that no shelter is put in here. I just wonder if I mean, because the Quality of Life did say they would be open to a family shelter. We could let their resolution carry that and have ours just be no,
All
and stay super strong for youth.
the electeds were advocating to change it to a family shelter.
Yeah, we don't need to,
We don't have to do that, though. They've already done it.
we could just be specific for our limited issue and
Yeah.
let everyone else.
See, I personally would find that confusing.
In
I've got
conflict?
two CB1 board resolutions that say different things.
Yeah.
They're focused on the building
I-
itself, we're focused on the kids.
I hear you. I just,
It's on low.
what,
We're
I
not
love the
saying,
way
that-
you
we're not
worded
saying
the
no
last
shelter in
piece.
our.
we
not
are,
saying no.
I can write it down.
we are.
We
I
are.
thought Tricia was saying, do we say no shelter full stop?
I don't think we say anything about the shelter, say this is what we want. Distance, monitors, that.
Cause
Distance only, we're not saying monitors. We're not getting to monitors.
Well, if we go into the family shelter, if we make that, a therefore be it resolved, that if this contract is signed, that the only possible shelter that would be acceptable and appropriate would be a family shelter, and have it be an additional therefore be it resolved, that if a family shelter is chosen for the space, that a full-time monitor be outside during school hours. I mean, we could go there, but that would, take care of that.
Can I say something? I know I'm in
What
the.
do you think, Bob?
Yeah. Okay, first, was there any written resolution distributed at the meeting or so? I haven't seen anything, written resolution. That I could,
Quality of life resolution.
excuse me?
There was no resolution distributed for this meeting,
No.
no.
Okay. So and you have nothing on your table?
No, we don't have any resolution.
I got it. I just want to state one thing on the question of family shelters. I ran and worked in a family shelter for 6 years. A family shelter at that location would bring tons of children, which I'm not opposed to the Peck Slip School. Where would those children go to school? And do we have the capacity? Do we have the resources? So my question is, does this resolution call for substituting this shelter with a family shelter?
that's
Yes.
what we're debating right
That's a
now.
really good question, Bob, about school.
Okay, I would vote no on a family shelter. To open a family shelter in September would be chaotic. I don't know if construction has started. I know that the construction would be different for a family shelter than a men's shelter. So I don't know I think they're planning to open this thing very soon. And that means that the construction plans, not only the contract, has already been approved with the capital expenses of building the men's shelter, not a family shelter. Did we hear that the Quality of Life Committee called for a family shelter?
So they said that the deal had been done, and they said that that would be the only shelter they would feel would be appropriate next to
Right.
the school.
But Bob, it just dawned on me that we actually never had a conversation with the school or any of the school leadership.
I know but you can have a conversation with, you can have a conversation with the school, but tonight, or the Quality of Life Committee, calling for a family shelter is a totally different thing. And
But that's what people have been suggesting.
it's uninformed, in my humble opinion, to call for a family shelter, and they plan on going forth with this men's shelter, and a family shelter may or may not be less impact or easier on a school. So that's just my opinion, and I've worked in one at the Henry Street Urban Family Center for 6 years, a family shelter. So I would just give you that guidance. And if you're calling for family shelter, I would not vote for the resolution.
Yeah, I don't think we weighed impact. I think you're right. It would certainly have a great impact on a school if there were an additional, I don't know, 30 to 60 kids. But I think safety has been the overarching concern that everyone has had. And so I don't know if the impact of there being more students would be a bigger issue, but certainly the overarching issue that everyone has.
Right, and I'm saying the overarching issue of safety can be quickly rectified with a couple of full-time security guards there, and it just doesn't, it doesn't move me the way it moves, and I don't think this has been brought up to the school community. I think you're right.
Yes,
But-
I'm saying we haven't even discussed with them.
Yeah, so I just think tonight you should leave it alone.
But to the extent you raised a good point, Bob, these kids don't necessarily need to go to Peck Slip, right? They perhaps go through the same process as any of our neighborhood families, which means it could be any number of elementary schools in the neighborhood. They might walk
Maybe not.
or 150 or 276. I mean,
Maybe.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know.
But it's right around the corner. And if you have a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, it would be good to bring them to, and I didn't hear Kelly say anything about preparing for these for this type of increase.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, although, and maybe I'm just out of date in my understanding. I don't think a family that lives across the street from 234 is guaranteed to get a seat at 234.
No, but I don't think I think that's apples and oranges. They usually do, if you live across the street from 234, usually get into 234. You're zoned for 234. I don't know what the requirements are for family shelters. But again, I would also, as you're researching this, look at what the physical facility is of the facility, because you're not going to put a family of 4 or 5 in a room that is just for a man. I don't know what the layout is of there's a number of issues. Just trying to be a bit helpful here. I would just leave it alone.
Hey, Bob, the quality of life, we just got the quality of life resolution. It says the Peck Slip School community supports a large group of approximately 75 homeless migrant children. The Peck Slip School community said they would be able to support additional children and has systems and resources to support homeless.
Bob, I placed it in the.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. That looked
In the
important.
chat, Bob.
The resolution's in the chat,
Up in the
but
chat,
what
Bob.
was being said is that in the quality of life resolution, the Peck Slip School community is on record as saying they can support up to 75 additional migrant children in the school.
It's the 9th whereas.
9 and 10.
Who said that?
Adopted by the full
The
board.
Peck Slip Community School, the community of the Peck Slip School.
Check out the 9th and 10th whereas.
I don't, we've taken a number of immigrant children into our programs at Peck Slip. I don't know who's suggesting that they could take 75 of any type of children that comes in over the summer. I just don't know. We do have a summer rising program there this summer that could accommodate those children, but I'm not so sure. Even though it's in the resolution, I would be, I don't know where, that's a community board resolution, right? That someone wrote it, that's a community.
This is a quality of life resolution.
Yeah, but it's written by the community board, right?
Correct.
And they're speaking for the Peck Slip community, for the Peck Slip parents there.
Correct. I mean,
No,
looking
no.
at first things first on this. would
Yeah,
be-
I'm not so sure that's correct. I'm suspect of that too. I mean, I could be wrong. The great Buddha says you can be wrong. I'm just saying, if one parent came to a quality of life committee, or a few of them came and said, we can take 75 more kids, I don't think that reflects Kelly and school administration. I don't know.
It might not, but I find it interesting that it's a
And
specific
it's a
number.
specific, yeah.
Yeah,
We know.
Yeah, I don't, but keep,
I don't think it would have made it, well, unless it came from.
Yeah.
I've heard several.
Not on this committee, but I would like to have a guideline established for, Department of Social Services, with the placement of homeless shelters from schools. It's just a matter of not procedure. It makes sense that any type of shelter, there should be some separation. I think 500 feet is a reasonable distance, 2 blocks away. I think we're getting into the weeds too much of this.
Well, I mean, we do have to decide. So we're definitely including that as it
Yeah.
therefore will
Yeah,
be
that's gonna be
resolved.
in-
But we have to decide, are we also going to tie in what the quality of life recommended and say, if this contract is signed, we demand that instead of a men's shelter, that a more appropriate demographic such as a family shelter be placed there?
I say,
That's the question.
I say no.
You say no.
Because if we're adamant about 500 feet distance, we can't then say, here's an exception that lets you get in anyway, around.
yeah. That's right.
I think you might need Tammy's input here as chair of the CB1. How she might be asked to explain two
Because I hear you
seemingly
about being
contradictory
consistent.
Yeah.
resolutions. And I hear what you're saying, but there's CB1 and there's two different viewpoints being expressed. Tammy as the chair, I think just needs to be able to talk to that.
Right, well, she's the one that handed this. I did not ask to pick this up, just so you know, because I asked to pick it up before it was assigned to quality of life. She felt as though it belonged there, and I respect that. But when we did that, she made the decision not to make it a joint committee discussion and resolution. You know,
Which are,
there were reasons for that too,
Oh.
in terms of who was coming and, how many people were coming. There were just, she had her reasons. Anyway,
That's fine, but. not
so as a result,
to-
this is why all this time has passed, because that was going on the record for CB1, was the quality of life resolution. She then, when she found out that they're still planning to go forward with it, felt that the youth committee needs to chime in specifically now, as with youth points, to try to create some more serious concern about its impact on the youth that involved in the situation. So that's how it was framed to me, just so you all know. And so with that said, Tammy has already green-lighted that piece. Now, we could definitely go back to her and say, we're tripping on this a little bit.
Yeah.
And would you like to advise whether or not we should, because our committee is feeling as though they don't want to necessarily recommend a family shelter. We feel as though it's better for them to back out of this deal. Are you okay with that? Because it contradicts another committee. And I think that's a really good point that Andrew just made. Because, you know, we can't just make that assumption after being called upon to chime in on it from a youth standpoint.
We look
So,
at the- What to do, so.
So,
yeah.
so Tricia, it's your call to put it to this committee. I would just say, if you put it up as a family shelter, I'll vote no, because I need more information from the purveyors of whoever built the shelter and to what's going on with the schools. But I would vote no. But if other people want to vote yes, it's fine.
Where I'm struggling with this, I'll come back to the very original statement I think was made. That there's a real estate transaction that's happened, there's a contract in place. We're in an environment where the cities are struggling for funding and revenues. I think it's gonna be really hard to persuade them to walk away from a transaction that's been done.
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
versus getting a better outcome in terms of what goes in there.
Mm.
That's my concern.
Yeah,
I don't know that they're gonna walk away from this deal, and if the only thing they have going forward is a men's shelter to get this done,
and they have nothing preventing them from doing it. That's the reason I thought to have that set, that if you refuse to do this, because they can.
I think that's important.
I don't understand why this contract that they signed would be so ironclad. There's always ways, with penalties to get out of it. And if not providing the services, the city's not gonna continue to pay for, let's say it doesn't open because, this resolution passes and hopefully the city or state passes a minimum distance for homeless shelters, they're not gonna pay. So I don't understand that argument about, the fiscal, constraint that city and state will have. By not opening would actually save money. They wouldn't pay this developer for the contract if the shelter doesn't open.
Well, if they're in breach of contract, then there are penalties. I think it's gonna be difficult. Look, we have an administration both at the federal and state level, city level that are in turmoil, right?
30% vacancy rate.
While I agree we should pursue distance requirements as a legislative action, I don't know that that's gonna delay what may happen here. And where I'm struggling is, I think a better outcome is some other type of shelter versus a position where we're saying essentially walk away from this contract, which is what we'd be saying.
You saying we should focus on making them.
I'm saying I'm struggling with how to.
But this,
Eric, I don't think they're gonna walk away from a real estate.
They're not.
there's other uses for this building, the city.
They're not. They're gonna put in a men's shelter.
Be a shelter, it could be other office, it could be an office.
But don't they have a
city office.
contract with a shelter
It's
operator?
a shelter operator is who the contracts, if they don't
Oh,
offer
okay,
other
so
kinds.
it's with the shelter operator, so therefore, if it's with the shelter operator, why does New York City care about the developer of the property? The shelter operator hasn't provided any services for the city yet.
The way it works is that the developer enters a lease with the shelter operator, and then the shelter operator contracts with the city to offer the services of the shelter. I tend to think that Eric may be right, that it's not, a forever deal, and there might be ways out of the contract. I even think that
Okay.
depending on the way the mayoral election goes, it might not ever.
But what do we think that we're gonna convince the city to not go through with this contract? We don't like this. The city's gonna say, okay. The contract is that.
That's it.
I agree with you.
I'm gonna take a question from a member of the public, because we've had a lengthy discussion. Anthony?
Hi, so I'm pretty involved with the push to not have the shelter next to the school. I'm on the board of the PAST, a nonprofit that formed. So, and I'm also very familiar with the whole process with the city and how this contract is written and their ins and outs. So I can tell you, the city does have an out, especially before the shelter opens. So if they wanted to cancel the contract, they could. The issue is they don't want to. Yeah.
All right, let him finish.
Can I hear, say that again? How do you know that that's the case?
So my father was the CEO of CUCS for 35 years. So that's the other major homeless provider in the city. It's Breaking Ground and CUCS are the two biggest ones. So my entire life I've been around this system, and I've had hours and hours of conversations with him about how this works, understanding the contracts. The reason, if you're curious, the reason that they're proposing this safe haven, right, is it is the most profitable type of shelter for both the provider and the developer, because the way that the money is structured is based off of hotel rates in the area. Whereas if it was a permanent, if it was a permanent affordable housing, the money that they would be getting paid would be more structured around rents. So you can imagine how much, a month you get on rent versus how much you get a month on a hotel rate. So that,
Mhm.
they're getting paid something like $300 per night per resident, which is an insane. I mean, that's why this contract is close to $100 million over the course of 9 years when they only paid 25 million for the property. So there's a reason that the developer is not walking away from this. There's a reason they don't want a different type of shelter, and that's because of the money. So,
And
like, I think
Where
the
can we
point
get a
of
copy of the contract?
I think the point of passing this resolution is just to add ammo to our fire that we are trying, to our whole argument that we're trying to do. So, the local community has already raised money. We have a lawsuit in. We're expecting a response from DHS in the next week or so. We're then going to be going in front of a judge. And so it would help if, we have one more thing to present to the judge that basically says, well, there's been a resolution passed by Community Board 1, stipulating that, X amount of distance has to be maintained between public schools and, and a shelter. And then, it's one more thing to basically add to our arsenal of reasons trying to get this thing to stop.
Well, there are parameters. There's no legislation about that presently. How are you arguing that in court?
So we're basically going to be arguing that the decision to locate this type of shelter is arbitrary and capricious, and that it's done so without any concern for the safety of the school. And we're basically hoping, like, the reality is these types of lawsuits do not have a great history of being successful. But we're hoping that we can at least try and delay the opening long enough to make it to the next administration.
Anthony, I have a question for you. Do you
Sure.
think that which do you think is more effective? To just simply say that there should be a distance guideline and that be that, or to say there should be a distance guideline, and if for some reason there is no other alternative but to go forward with this shelter, then it must be a family shelter?
I mean, I think personally, the way I think that
Do you
the
think it
resolution
weakens
should
it to
be
offer an
written a little
alternative?
bit is that I think it should be written towards what the real problem is, right? The real problem is not homeless people. The real problem is the drug use. And so I would propose that a resolution be written that if there's any type of, I don't know the exact language, but basically, like, if there was any type of shelter or city run agency that within a 500-foot radius of a school, that it has to have a zero tolerance policy for drugs, for their residents using drugs, drug addiction, and that would eliminate the safe haven as an option.
So it's
If theoretically,
the type of shelter. So you don't think it weakens it by offering this alternative to say, hey, if this absolutely, without a doubt, is a done deal and has to be there, then we have to change the population.
yeah, I mean, I think that it makes a better argument that as a community, being very reasonable, saying that we are open to other types of shelter. To simply say, no, we don't want a shelter, that's going to get a lot of pushback, with like sort of like the NIMBY
Right.
arguments, right? So by saying, and then,
Is that the same approach your lawsuit's taking?
yes, so, we have said in some of we have, for example, we proposed a settlement agreement. And one of the things that we had said was that we would allow, that we would be open to a family shelter, one for senior citizens, one basically something that makes our side look reasonable, which is, sort of what we're trying to present to a judge.
Okay.
So I think,
Can I ask Anthony a question?
All right, Morton has a question
Yeah,
for you.
Anthony, I recognize your voice. You were at the last meeting of Quality of Life?
yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
he
okay.
was.
And where can we get a copy of the contract? I've been trying to do some research while we're sitting here, and I can't seem to find a portal to download or access a copy.
So I don't know that it's available publicly like that. I attended a meeting where they just basically did a public hearing for the contract reading, where they had like a window of like 4 hours where the public was allowed to view the contract. And so I went on that and I sat there for 4 hours and basically read as much of it as I could.
Oh, okay, because I see that a contract's listed, but there doesn't seem to be a link from the controller's office to actually download. Do you think your lawyer has a copy of the contract?
Yeah, if you want to send me like a text or email, I can see what I can try to get you.
Yeah, or I could email him too. I looked at the.
But that's the gist of it, correct? So, I mean, that's really what's most important for us to know, because now we have the quality of life resolution, we have your lawsuit. You know, I think it could be
It's helpful
powerful
to
to
be
have a
consistent.
common voice. With us adding, I do think it's gonna be very important that we add that therefore be it resolved about the same thing that you're saying, that they should not be, I mean, although it doesn't sound like your lawsuit is saying that no shelter should be sited within 500 feet. You have parameters around it, is that right?
We're basically saying that we're not opposed to a shelter. Like that flat statement of no shelter, because I don't necessarily agree. Just as an example, the provider Breaking Ground, they have another shelter that is in the Lower East Side that is strictly for senior citizens who were formerly homeless. So, but now you have, individuals that are over 65. There's no drug use allowed. They've been through the system already where they're basically already reintegrated into society. Like something like that, I think would be fine and even maybe great, right? Like now you have a senior citizen housing next door where you got a bunch of potential volunteers at the school. So I think there's opportunities where the site could be done, where a shelter could be done in the right way. And so,
Okay, so maybe we turn the corner on that then. Or at least we can talk about it as a committee and say that therefore be it resolved is before a shelter is sited within 500 feet of a school, that the city or the developer must come in front of the community board to discuss the kind of shelter it is, and before a contract is signed, to make sure it's appropriate, and then also have it therefore be
And that there's
resolved
community
that if
buy-in.
any shelter is sited within 500 feet of a school, that there must be no drugs and
Yes.
alcohol.
Mhm.
I second that, Tricia. I think that's well said.
I'd like to add another caveat to this. It should also be, no homeless shelter residents with a history of violence. It's not just substance abuse, they have a history of violence as well.
Well, I mean, that could be part of the therefore be it resolved. Therefore be it resolved that prior to any contract being signed between the city and a shelter provider, that they are mandated to come before the community to discuss the potential population before a contract is signed. I mean, that would be enough, because then we
Right.
Because then you would
know.
hash out.
Tricia, I would put in there, instead of the contract is signed, I might do a / implementation too. I don't know, we want to know if they can change, the judge might want to change it, or we might, but the word contract might also mean implementation, because the contract may already be signed.
Well, this one is.
They already did that. This current, Breaking Ground, for this location, they came before, per that wording. They did everything.
But they're still allowed to go forward with it, and that's what we can prevent.
Yes,
But the language that you recited.
Yeah.
That they have to come to the community or community board. That's what they did. Remember, we don't want them to just come to the community board and say, this is what we have, this is what we're doing, and they listen to us.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You want to get specific about what would be turned down in advance.
Right, where they have to get, it's not just to hear us, and then, they come to our meetings, never give us any feedback or give us empty answers.
I agree.
And where they have to go through the ULURP process, where through city planning.
Well, I mean, ULURP is triggered by the lot, so that's not going to work in this case, because not every lot needs to go through a ULURP, so you can't just force one for the sake of it.
But homeless shelters have to go. If it's a city-owned and operated homeless shelter, they have to go through ULURP. That's what they're going through this.
No, I don't know.
They're going through a,
Emergency.
and also using another company and.
Contracting it out.
Yeah, contracting it out. That's why they're going through it, because if it were a city-run and owned homeless shelter, they have to go through ULURP.
So
It's not a ULIP item, often.
I think that's a really, I don't know, that could be a little bit of weeds, I
What-
think,
what-
because then you're telling them they have to change the entire structure of how they cite. I
Whatever.
would rather say what is not gonna be permitted
Right.
within 500 yards of a school, or 500 feet of a school. It will not be permitted that there will be any drugs and alcohol on site. It will not be permitted that anyone with a background in violence, would be, we might have more success than that, with that, than asking them to change the structure and force a ULURP. I mean, what does everybody else think about that?
Let me just say, this, with the emergency powers that executive has, they should have it, for.
Plans and
But to have it in law for at least 15 years using this emergency.
Tricia, I think you and Desi have outlined it fine. It's kind of late. I think you have outlined it fine. To my satisfaction, I don't know if other people want to speak to it, but I would try to move on.
Well, we're finished, so this is it. So what I'll say is that, and Anthony, is your hand up?
Yes.
Why don't you, speak one more time in case there's something you want to share before we call the meeting?
And thank you, Anthony, for
Yeah, thank you.
showing up.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I couldn't make it earlier, juggling two kids, but the I think that the focus on, the drugs as the issue and trying to basically say, flat out, this is not going to be allowed in Community Board 1, I think that's the best thing to do, right?
Yeah,
And I would really focus on that and the drug use. And just to clarify, there's already no drugs allowed on site or to be used on site, which is part of the problem because they do allow people that are actively addicted. They know that the residents are going to continue drug use because they even do, they do what's called harm reduction, where they basically teach people how to use safer, which is an overall good thing, right? Because you have less overdoses. But the reality is that they're still going to be using. And so if they're not allowed to use on site, where do they go? They're going to go around the corner. They're going to, go out elsewhere in the community where the school is. So I think that you just have to keep that in mind in writing your resolution is that, you're basically saying no to facilities that allow active drug users.
so, and you're saying that as well. So if we can't prevent them from using outside and they let them leave, they're based on their structure. Were you recommending monitors as well outside?
So that's one thing that like the community board has talked about, like big picture was saying, like there should be a dedicated security, for the school, and the provider would never agree to that. They basically said that we have 6 security guards in the shelter, and as needed, they can go out and patrol the block. But that doesn't really work for us because, that's just because they patrol, a couple hours a day, there's 24 hours in a day. You could have someone there's no curfew, by the way, at a safe haven. So you could have an individual who's leaving the safe haven at 2 a.m., goes around the corner and gets high and leaves their needle in the cobblestone street that the kids are going to play in at 8 a.m. the next day. And so that's really like, the worst case fear for the parents and, the people that are pushing back on this. And so that's what our argument's centering around.
So the argument is just a no deal for a safe haven men's shelter at this location.
Correct. A safe haven just doesn't work. It's
Okay. So in wrapping this up then, is everyone in favor of saying that, the points that we just discussed? We discussed that we demand that if they must go forward with a shelter at this location, it cannot be a safe haven men's shelter. And going forward, therefore be it resolved that in any placement of any shelter, that they must come to the community board prior to, we don't use the word contract, prior to moving forward with the siting. So that if the population in a shelter has a history of violence, drugs or alcohol, they be turned down.
Yep.
And then
The shelter would be. turned
the
down.
shelter.
The shelter will be turned down.
And that will be the end of it.
Yeah.
We can have a whereas be, whereas safe haven shelters, while they prohibit the use of drugs and alcohol inside the building, they do not prohibit it outside the building. I think that's
Right.
the whereas.
Mhm.
And then, you know, with that overarching sentiment, we could approve the, resolution, and I can work through it with Desi, the language, the specific language with Desi, in case anybody else wants to. But if anybody else wants to iron more language here, let's do it.
Signed up to help, right?
Well, I look at it and give my input afterwards.
Yeah, for sure, Morton,
Sure, yeah.
I didn't know you were coming, so the reason I'm saying Desi is because I had talked to her before to hand it to her. If you're available, totally, we would love, I would love for the two of you to do it if you can.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been involved in this issue since its inception
Yes.
at the
Good.
Quality of Life, Quality of Life Committee.
All right, awesome.
Groovy.
If you guys can work on that together, maybe you do it and then I'll take a look at it, maybe even better.
Yeah.
Does
Three heads
anybody
of-
have
I'm
like,
gonna do the draft and I'll look at it.
Yeah.
does anybody want, is everybody clear on the language or want some confirmation about the language? Does everybody understand the sentiment of it and they agree to it?
Yeah.
Okay,
That was a good hash out.
is there all in favor? Okay, great. Bob? Anthony, you're. in-
I'm okay, yes.
Thank you so much.
Anthony, one
Yeah,
more
it-
question?
Do some course correction.
Anthony, you still there?
He is, I can unmute
What do you
him if
need?
you'd like.
I'm okay.
Is he there?
Yeah,
Anthony?
I'm still here. I think everything you guys said is great, and I'm happy it's moving forward.
As a lawyer, I like to be precise in language. When they say the contract has been registered, it means the signed contract has been registered and it's in effect. Is that is that your understanding?
You're asking about the current status of the contract?
Yeah, I mean, when they say the contract has been registered, it means the
Yeah, what does
contract
that
is
mean?
signed, registered.
So basically, the way that it worked is that the contract was registered after DHS, and the provider and the owner had to all sign the contract, right? Now it's registered, and then it goes in for final approval by the city controller's office.
That's what
And
I.
so, right, and so now now it has been signed off by the controller as well. So we're basically one step past the contract being registered. It's now approved.
So there's no more stages that it has to be reviewed, it's done.
Correct.
All right, excellent. The resolution passes. Anthony, thank you so much for coming. That was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think that, you know, the messaging between the two resolutions and the lawsuit are aligned, which I think is important here. We are more likely to be successful and, yeah, I still feel as though this monitoring situation could be worth an ask, but if you don't think that's realistic, I don't think we should water it down. But that certainly would help if they had the expectation that they were gonna have to be looking after these people when they're outside.
And that's an expense that should come from them and not the school.
Correct.
Because the school's concerned and the school would be prompted to do that, but they shouldn't have to pay for that.
We have motion.
Well, maybe we wait, you know, maybe we leave that out for now, because if they meet us with the family shelter, then
Then we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we'll have another opportunity to do that later.
We're gonna have a motion.
Motion.
Second.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for the great discussion.
Bye, Bob.
So I wasn't gonna
Bye,
bring
Bob.
this up.
Bye, Bob.
Get to
Thank
the
you.
resolution, but how are they